and psychological safety of kids in school. We have three wonderful panelists who I'm excited to hear from today. And note that any one of today's panelists could fill the entire webinar hour. But just before we talk to our panelists and meet them, I want to say that the recording of today's webinar will be available on the OCMH website. And we will also plan to follow up with a resource document for all who registered. We received a number of questions in the registrations, and we'll try to address as many of those as we can during the webinar, but know that we may not be able to get to all of them today. The reality is that this topic cannot be fully covered in 1 hour. What we're going to do, using OCMH's recent school shooting fact sheet as a jumping off point, is discuss the 3 strategies that we're focusing on. They are safety planning, belonging, and safe storage. But again, before we begin, I want to acknowledge that some of our participants listening today may have experienced a school shooting. We know that is a very traumatizing experience, so please take care of yourself during the session. Step away if you need to, and reach out if you need help.
Unless if you're the 4th, I can do it before 10 or after 2.
So as you see on the slide, the next slide, Uplift Wisconsin is a resource that you could call on. And it is organized by the Mental Health Association of Mental Health America of Wisconsin. So we also have on the next slide the contact info for those who are on the webinar today, and OCMH staff are on the Zoom as well in case anyone does need to reach out. Okay, let's meet our panelists.
I can start, Linda. I'm Trish Kilpin. I'm Director of the Office of School Safety at Wisconsin Department of Justice. Thanks for having me today.
Heidi, how about going next?
Hi, I'm Heidi Johnson. I work for WAVE Educational Fund. WAVE is a statewide nonprofit dedicated to reducing gun deaths and injuries. We do that through advocacy and through education. Before I came and did this work, I was a teacher for 14 years, and so I'm really thrilled to be a part of this panel today because it's really bringing together my 2 passions of gun violence prevention and education.
Thanks, Heidi. Larice?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I am Larice Snyder. I am a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging consultant with our CISA 6 Center for All. And my work has really been dedicated to working with school leaders and establishing environments in which all have a high sense of belonging, both in schools and in communities. And I came into the education space by way of social work and youth development. So I've been involved at many different levels in educational environment and program management, and I'm excited to engage with my colleagues here today.
Thanks, Larice. All right, let's dive in. National data shows about half of U.S. schools feel very prepared to deal with suicide threats. And half of that number, about 1 in 4 schools, feel very prepared to deal with an active shooter event. We also know from the most recent YRBS data, that's the Youth Risk Behavior Survey data on Wisconsin students, that a good portion of our students of color do not feel safe at school. 21% of Black students and 20% of Hispanic students never feel safe at school. The YRBS data also show that school belonging in Wisconsin is continuing its downward trend. According to data collected in 2022 and recently released from the National Center for Education Statistics, cyberbullying is up, particularly in middle schools. In addition, these data tell us that schools are increasingly turning to preventive measures to deal with safety concerns. 65% of schools employ threat assessment teams, and 90% have increased social emotional supports for students since the COVID-19 pandemic. I'd like to start our discussion with threat assessment. Trish, please describe for us how threat assessment teams and the threat assessment process help school safety.
It's really a good question, Linda. I think to many, it might be a mystical process when we talk about behavioral threat assessment and management. And really, the school of thought behind this behavioral threat assessment has changed over the years. And we are including in our work for behavioral threat assessment to prioritize prevention. We know that school shootings are relatively rare, but the impact of them is tremendous. The students and family and staff that experience those events, they're forever changed. Their perceptions of safety and security altered. So at Office of School Safety, we provide resources and training to help people to actualize behavioral threat assessment and management as a preventative tool. When past school shootings have been analyzed, really we see that there were often warning signs and warning behaviors that somebody who engaged in that attack was struggling, and that those warning behaviors were missed. Most of all, if not all of those incidents of school shootings stress the importance of having a behavioral threat assessment team that is trained in order to prevent these attacks from occurring. And so at Office of School Safety, we have created a training. We bring it all over the state to Wisconsin. We're careful to try to provide equity to reach every corner of our state. If anyone's on the call that hasn't been able to attend one of the trainings, but is interested in hosting one in their region, please let us know and we'd be glad to come. All of our trainings are free. Really, during this training, we're empowering multidisciplinary teams. So that would include school resource officers, school administrators, pupil service, school nurses, teachers, and other staff on how to better understand the totality of a student's circumstances and learn how to build effective plans of support. We really do believe that no one was born to be a school shooter. There is no one profile of a school shooter. Instead, we really do see dangerousness as best viewed as a state of being, as opposed to a trait. When considering everything happening in a child's life, they have decided that they're going to use violence to resolve their upset. We need to look for dynamic areas of risk that we can intervene upon so that we can both prevent violence, accurately understand the child's thinking and behavior, and provide interventions for that youth. Clearly, exclusionary discipline and arrest will not solve this problem. We need to make sure that we're acting early, understanding these behaviors, and then intervening effectively. And that's what behavioral threat assessment does.
Thanks, Trish, for those important perspectives and that important information. One of the aspects of school safety is having drills. So can you speak to what the best practices are around lockdown drills, especially as it relates to children's mental health?
I'd love to. This is a confusing space for people. We have some who believe that drills are so frightening for kids that they don't do them regularly. And we have others who are doing them routinely. It is a requirement in Wisconsin for schools to engage in school safety drills. And so I first want to point out that there really is a difference between a school safety drill and a school safety exercise. So a drill, the goal of a drill is to increase automaticity, to build confidence so that people know what to do in an emergency. And it is best done when we're not increasing anxiety. So we recommend that drills are done in what we call a non-sensorial way. That means no sensory experiences for the child during the drill. We don't light a garbage can on fire to have a fire drill. And we don't need to have sounds of bullets or scary sounds happening in order for people to practice their protective actions that they would take in a school emergency. So because it's a drill, we want people to announce this is a drill. There's no purpose that it does not benefit people to be scared, thinking that they're going to be harmed when they're not. So clearly stating it's a drill. And then we want to make sure that opportunities for practice are carefully scaffolded so that we're building upon kids' skills. And we want to give staff the opportunity to experience these drills first so they can lead our youth. We know that the adults often model, when they model calm and they model confidence, that the kids are less frightened. So we want to make sure that drills include planning and practice for everyone, kids with functional access needs, kids with disabilities, kids with trauma experiences. And to do that, we look to the research. And the research really tells us that doing them in a non-sensorial way, building and scaffolding opportunities, talking about them first, explaining what's going to happen, and then giving kids an opportunity to debrief afterwards, to provide feedback about what went well. That empowers youth and that gives them more confidence in feeling safe at school.
Thanks, Trish. It's really helpful to have those guidelines and that 360 perspective on what we need to be thinking about, and to identify these practices that we can ask our local schools about. Now let's consider social emotional supports. I was pleased to learn that 90% of schools have increased their social emotional supports since the pandemic began. We know that these skills improve wellness and mental well-being. But Larice, how do these kinds of social emotional supports help students feel safe at school?
Yeah, thank you. I was really happy about this increase as well, as social emotional supports and social emotional learning is so critical to the student experience and ultimately student safety, and ensuring that students have what they need to thrive in an educational environment. So when we think about social emotional learning or social emotional supports, oftentimes there's a misconception that it's just one program that's implemented, that it's only about identity. And what social emotional learning really does is it teaches students and staff how to develop empathy, how to communicate effectively, especially across difference, and how to collaborate with others who have a lot of different experiences all coexisting in the school and educational environment. And as a result, then it does increase student belonging. It promotes inclusivity, and it encourages respect for one another. Again, through difference, it increases the classroom climate, and so that students can feel safe in expressing themselves freely and authentically, that they can share ideas that they have and engage in really meaningful ways, which all contribute to the student sense of community and a student sense of belonging. And when students have a sense of belonging and feel part of the community in which they spend a substantial amount of their youthhood, as in schools, they are certainly less likely to harm themselves and harm others that are in their community. And so the impact of social emotional learning is very important to thinking about how we view and understand and what we can do as educators. We all play a role in seeing students, validating students, engaging with students, different perspective. And we also think about the creating empathy, developing our empathy skills, and being able to resolve conflict in ways that are healthy for us to engage and not avoid, and where that conflict can build up over time if we're not addressing it. So we really use that time to engage with one another, to help students develop the specific skills that they can move through conflict with. The other thing about social emotional learning is that it really does teach students that emotional regulation as they're trying to figure out who they are, where they belong. Again, that sense of belonging, it helps students really learn and manage the skills to be able to identify, manage their emotions. So to be able to identify their emotions, name their emotion, reflect and understand how emotions are presenting themselves, which again is reduces the likelihood of conflicts, reduces the likelihood of bullying and other disruptive behaviors that certainly compromise school safety. And so social emotional learning plays a really big role in the actual tool development and skill development for our students to create a safe environment.
I really appreciate that, Louise, and I appreciate the connection between the social emotional learning and skills and belonging, which is something that our office is really focusing on because we see it as being so important to children's well-being, their attendance at school, and then their success at school. So, Louise, do you see a difference in your work on building school belonging at middle school versus a high school? And have you had success with different strategies in each of those settings?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really thinking about some of the practices and the work that we get to do all over the state, and really seeing and working with school leadership teams to develop the practices to be able to increase student belonging. So if we think about it just from an overall practice of understanding the student belonging, one of the things that we recognize is that the student body and the adults who serve along with and for the student body, obviously there's oftentimes there is a big disconnect in lived experiences and how students are experiencing school. And one of the differences that we see, especially from our middle school age and elementary, but then into high school, is students also find a greater sense of themselves. And so in middle school, as we think about lived experiences and we think about understanding how students want to experience belonging in the school setting, we oftentimes give strategies around having overall kind of exploratory understanding around different identities and different experiences. So strategies and thinking about what kind of examples do we give when we're rolling out new curriculum or new strategy, new content? What kind of literature are we reading to be able to look into, make those connections from students to see themselves and see each other? What kind of, again, examples are we giving? And so when we're thinking about middle school, we're really thinking about some of the exploratory thinking about how identities play a role with our own development. And then when we think about high school, students develop a very strong sense of self kind of overall, right? I mean, of course, I'm giving a broad sense, and individually, we will see that range and spectrum all the way through a K-12 experience. But students really do have a sense of self. And so our role as educators is to develop an even deeper sense around identity development. So skills in really being able to engage our students in understanding what their identity means to them, what their experience means to them. So for some prior experiences, as we even opened up today, they're all going to impact us differently. So as educators, we really need to be able to engage across and through experiences that are different than our own and make those connections in how we're showing up and how our students are seeing us. And so one example that in a school district that has really done this work around belonging so incredibly well is the Platteville School District. And what they started with is really as they realized through their data, including the YRBS data as we opened up with in our framing our conversation today, they realized there were some exceptional disparities in their data and how students were experiencing school. And so they developed you belong statements. And so through being informed by engaging with students and asking students, how are students belonging here? What can we do differently? What are the things we need to be talking about? Developed their commitments as adults in the building to their students to say, we absolutely believe and will practice and model that you belong in this school with us. And as a result, we will do everything that we can and it was a step-by-step process, really specific to the school district. It was a step-by-step process to say these are our commitments to you. And there's lots of data has shifted. There are so many great examples of how students have been able to take on advocacy roles and really be able to talk about when things are happening, be able to advocate. We need to have a conversation as a district. They can engage the adults in the building But one of the things that I think, when you talk about change in culture, students actually lead professional development for the educators. And so they have developed such a strong sense of trust, and trusting that adults are going to do something when they are bringing forward concerns around either mental health concern, bullying concern, whatever it might be. The students believe that adults are going to handle it, and so that level of trust now has transformed into students actually delivering and facilitating conversations around belonging and inclusion for their school district. And so that's been a great result of that work.
A lot of good information there and interesting distinctions between what's going on with middle schoolers and high schoolers in terms of identity and approaches to respond to that. Now, many studies of school shootings have found that bullying plays a prominent role. A majority of attackers had experiences with persistent bullying. Do you have best practices you can share around anti-bullying efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you shared, and it was earlier, it was mentioned. So, in the state of Wisconsin, all schools are required to have school policy on bullying. Very specifically laid out, having a process. However, some schools that's really the minimum, and that's where we might stop. And so, some best practices and things for school districts to consider. One is really to just engage students and families, as I shared with the Platteville School District, to understand what kind of bullying is happening and what does the school need to do about it. Not avoiding it, leaning in, and really understanding what is going to be most effective in the current. And that could change from year to year, semester to semester. And so, really having an ongoing opportunity for students and families to engage in understanding what kind of bullying is occurring. That's where we're going to get the most information. When we think about reporting, best practice is that you have multiple means of reporting, and so you have it very prominently displayed, both in your school, as well as any other. If you have social media, a website, who is responsible for receiving reports on bullying, and that you have a really clear process so that individuals can submit a written report. It could be a phone call. It's really clearly laid out as far as what the process is for reporting bullying. And that also multiple people can report. So a student can report on that they've been harmed by bullying. A fellow student can report that they witnessed bullying occurring to a classmate. An adult can report that they have witnessed bullying, and a parent as well. And so, multiple ways for individuals to report, and both being able to name your name and then also anonymous. And so, having the regular system of reporting and making sure that you are communicating that regularly. If you see something, you say something. And so, as far as the bullying practices, those are key areas in understanding that. In having a really effective bullying policy. Also, another key area is listening. Because listening to your students when they say something, listen to your students. They might not have the words you expect or the description, or they might not be presenting it in the way that you would expect bullying to present itself. Listen to your students. Students are going to share the degree of details that really is corresponding with the degree of trust that they have. If they believe and trust, as they mentioned with the Platteville School District, if they believe something's going to happen in regards to what they report, they are more likely to report. And so we want to create that sense of belonging so that students are able to see something in this educational environment, knowing that bullying is not tolerated and that something will be done. And then lastly, really ensuring that we follow up and communicate. And so sometimes there's some sensitivity around follow up, making sure that where student privacy, absolutely not asking anyone to break any laws around student privacy. And we still have a responsibility to communicate. And so when bullying happens or when a report of bullying happens, ensure that we are following up and that we're communicating that's something that we have followed up with it, that we followed the process, and that in order to continue keeping trust with students and families, that bullying is absolutely not tolerated in this school district.
So many important ways to think about this issue and to address it. And bullying has really been an issue in Wisconsin schools. Having our data, kids from our schools have been identifying it more than on the national average. So Heidi, I'd like to turn to how families can be engaged on these issues. Research from the Secret Service National Threat Assessment Center shows that most school shooters get their guns from home, their parents, or a close relative. What advice do you have for what families can do in the home to keep kids safe?
Yeah, that's a really important question. So thank you for asking that. And the simplest answer is using safe storage practices for guns. I think that a lot of the time when people think about safe storage, they think about it primarily as a means to prevent unintentional shootings. And so I'm really glad that you highlighted that it's not only that, it also can help prevent school shootings. Safe storage of guns also can help reduce the likelihood that someone in the home will die by suicide. And safe storage reduces the likelihood of gun theft from your home. Now, safe storage is defined as storing all guns in the home locked away, unloaded, and kept separate from ammunition. So it's a very simple habit that people can get into that will greatly reduce multiple risks in the home. There's a couple of different really, really fantastic campaigns out there that highlight the importance of safe storage. One is End Family Fire, and then another is Project Be Safe. This is really great timing because Safe Week is actually next week, August 26th through 30th. And Safe Week is an opportunity to talk about the importance of storing guns, locked, unloaded, and separate from ammunition. It's also an opportunity to highlight the importance of conversations about safe storage. You know, whether we're gun owners or not, everybody can help reduce stigma in that area by talking to the people you know about the importance of safe storage. One really specific example is that I think a lot of parents have just a standard practice when your child is going to go spend time in someone else's home. I think it's a very common thing that you know, send a text or pick up the phone and just ask them, you know, questions to learn about the environment that they're going to be spending time in. And asking about how any guns in the home are stored, it should be an essential part of that conversation. For one, it's a way to lead by example and illustrate the importance. It's also making sure that you have all the information you need to make the decisions about whether you are comfortable with your child being in that environment. Links to Be Safe and Safe Week and Family Fire are all in the information packet that all people who registered today will receive.
Great, thank you. Heidi, what do trigger locks contribute to safe storage? And are there ways for families to get those for free?
Yeah, there's many opportunities to get free gun locks. Most of the time, free gun locks are not going to be trigger locks. They're going to be cable locks, but cable locks are a great starting place to get this safe storage device for free. The most reliable place that is often going to be a great place to start, regardless of where you live in Wisconsin, is going to be local police departments. There's roughly 180 municipalities across the state where the local police department has a project that gives out gun locks for free. And those exist in every part of the state. So I would say, you know, the obvious starting point is their local police. Sometimes healthcare providers may have free gun locks to give out. It's less common, but it is worth looking into, especially for people who may not be comfortable approaching police or going to a police department. This is also a really great moment for schools to become more active partners in things like providing gun locks or highlighting safe storage initiatives. In January, the National Department of Education sent a letter to every public school and every school district in the country, which is an awful lot of letters to go out, asking schools and districts to partner on safe storage incentives. One of the things that came along with that letter was a template letter that schools could send home to families, emphasizing the importance of storing guns locked, unloaded, and separate from ammunition. And so I think that really opens the door for schools to start partnering around safe storage. I know that we have at least one town here today where we've got members from the police department and members of the local school district. And so, there could be some great partnerships there if that police department has access to gun locks. Schools are a trusted resource by many families. A school could send out that letter to all families, could mention this partnership between a school and a police department, and, use that as a way to start making sure that these resources are available for anybody who wants them.
Thanks. Great to have the tips and the possibilities for collaboration in community. Really important stuff. So part of the reason we focused on this topic for the fact sheet and today's discussion is because gun violence and safety are issues that kids tell us they are really worried about. It's affecting their mental health. So how do we address chronic anxiety around school shootings at a time when students are constantly exposed to reports of threats and critical events in schools all over the country? Larice, do you have an insight on how to help kids feel safe or cope with their anxiety?
Yeah, I think that is a real concern as we think about what students, we have access to more information than when you think about previous generations. And so there is a lot to worry about that we see. And so students are coming to school with that anxiety and with, a level of fear. And we know also when they have a level of fear, they can't learn because that takes priority in our bodies is thinking about how do we cope with our fear. So the first thing I would say is that one, as adults, that we all can listen. We think about the idea of psychological first aid, and that we all, as providers, as adults, and that's in any role. That's not just a classroom teacher. That's support staff. That's custodial staff. Our food service staff, bus drivers. Our community partners, we all have an opportunity the responsibility really to listen to students, and we all can show up and be an ear for students, tell students that we see them, that we hear their concerns. I think sometimes when we think about the need and we understand, and not at all suggesting this replaces mental health professional support, and this is really that first step in believing that we have enough to be able to listen to students and then be able together to get them to the right resource. So when students are sharing things like, I feel anxious, I feel scared, I'm worried about that, as our first response, we can absolutely validate students. We hear you, we see you. Where do we need to go? We can do that together. And sometimes just that validation for a student, and again, connected right back to the sense of belonging. My teacher, my bus driver, my custodian, they see me, my coach. We all can do that. So that would be the first thing. Also, I think there's an opportunity, especially when I think about classroom teachers and I think about school administrators, to be frequently asking students how they are experiencing school. As I was talking about belonging, also, what are they worried about? And so, on a regular basis, you can ask, is there anything that you're worried about, today, this week, this month, that we should be addressing? And so by really normalizing the idea that we all carry a weight, you know, from our prior experience, that we're in school engaging in together as we think about our educational community. When we normalize that, well, sometimes we do have fear, and so how do we address that and we model that as adults? That is a way to really help students be able to cope with that as a educational leader, saying, yeah, sometimes I feel scared too. Sometimes I'm worried too. Like, what can we do about that? And really normalizing also being able to take care of ourselves. So asking questions like, what do you need right now? What would be helpful right now? And being able to have some ideas that we will get from our students right there for us to be able to support students in the moment, and then be able to determine what the next step is. Sometimes just listening to students is what they need right now. It's not always a referral somewhere else, and sometimes it is a referral somewhere else. So being able to feel confident and competent to be able to just address students' need in the moment and with validation and affirmation is so important.
Yeah, really listening and modeling coping skills are critical things that we all can do for kids in our lives. Trish, I know the Office of School Safety talks about the importance of help seeking as a school-wide culture issue and talks about the role of peer support in safety discussions. Can you walk us through the Speak Up, Speak Out program and how it contributes to school safety?
Absolutely. I'd love to do that. Earlier, I talked about a proven prevention strategy, and that's the behavioral threat assessment and management. The second proven prevention strategy that clearly has prevented school violence is a tip line like SUSO. So our Office of School Safety runs Speak Up, Speak Out Wisconsin. It is free to every school in Wisconsin, tribal schools, private schools, public schools. And we have a toolkit if someone would like to launch SUSO, and they just can contact us and we will provide that for them. The research behind SUSO is that when you have a confidential place for kids and families to report their concerns, we're more likely to hear about planned violence. So in 81% of other school shootings that have happened in the past, somebody knew about that child's plan to attack their school. We want to be able to get that information so that we can prevent the kind of tragedy that occurs in the aftermath of a school shooting. We have launched SUSO with a federal grant, and we now are maintaining that program. It is available. It will be here for the next school year for sure. And we welcome everyone, all schools, to utilize it. We know that since we launched it in 2020, we look at our data really carefully, and we have had over 250 concerns brought to SUSO about somebody planning a school attack. That concern has been then shared with local school district and law enforcement so that those plans can be thwarted and tragedy can be averted. And while the large body of research really does show that having SUSO reduces violence in your schools, we're just seeing such a broad benefit for multiple things, many of which Larisse and Heidi, you just talked about today. So we've had over 260 tips of our in the last 3 years about students being concerned that someone has a weapon, that there's somebody who has a gun or a knife or has a weapon on grounds. This is important information for us to get to people on that site so that they can intervene. Our largest tip, Larisse, is about bullying. And so as we talk about wanting to make sure that kids have trusted adults that they can go to if they're feeling upset or maltreated, they sometimes don't have access to those adults, especially at 1 a.m. or 11 o'clock at night or over Christmas break. And so SUSO runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we have trained analysts that interact in real time with our youth. The way that it is set up, the youth can kind of chat with the person and get feedback, get psychological support and validation for their struggle that they're going through. And then we make sure that the school receives that tip so that the school can effectively intervene, just as you were talking about, Louise, especially about bullying, harassment, child abuse. There's so many things that are reported to SUSO. We're seeing many kids contacting SUSO when they or their peers are struggling with thoughts of suicide and self-harm, if they're feeling like they don't belong at their school. So most of our tips fall in the category of bullying or cyberbullying, and we're really proud of that. Since our priority is prevention, and we do know that in previous school attacks, that those attacks started with a grievance or an upset, kids feeling like they didn't belong. The importance of that, Louise, I think is so critical. I'm so glad you talked about the importance of belonging. When kids feel a sense of connection, when they feel that they're seen and heard and respected at their school, they're less likely to plan a school attack. And so while we have 250 tips about planned school attacks in specific, we have thousands of tips that come to us about bullying. And those are intervention points that schools can get that information and intervene early. So we may be preventing harm that we don't even know because we're starting so early. And that's the space we love to be in, where we're not struggling at the last minute to prevent something, but we're using systematic ways of building people's sense of belonging and connection in their schools. I will say that I do think that culture of help seeking does require us to destigmatize mental health supports, because we don't want kids to think I'm telling on that person by contacting SUSO. We want for kids to endorse and believe that people who are struggling need help. And so if we can, provide this across our school communities, we're going to be more likely to hear about concerns that students have when kids trust us to handle that effectively and efficiently. So, SUSO has been a powerful tool. We're super proud of it. We are receiving thousands of tips. We've received over 10,000 tips to SUSO since it was launched in September 2020 from students and families who have concerns. And this allows for intervention points and support. So if anyone on the call here is interested in SUSO, just contact us and you too can launch it. We even provide $1,000 in grant funding per school year for items to promote SUSO through educational support items. So signage and magnets for your school bus, and Theraputty in the counselor's office that has the logo so you could give it to a child who's struggling, those types of things. So we're proud of SUSO. We know that SUSO prevents violence. It lets us have information about things that kids and families are experiencing, and we are fully committed to continuing that work. So thanks for Linda for giving me a chance to talk about SUSO. I always like to talk about it as long as I can.
And it's so important. It's such important work. You've done so much with preparing the folks who answer those calls and getting that program really going 24/7. Trish, I want to ask though, can parents call the SUSO line? Like, say I'm worried that my child's friend is having suicidal thoughts but hasn't talked to his parents about it. What do I do as a parent?
So SUSO's for everyone. Preventing violence is a community responsibility. So concerns go to SUSO when they're about school-aged youth. So whether that's you're the person who works at Quick Trip and you see the children coming in and doing something dangerous, or it's for families or the children themselves. So we have many ways that people contact SUSO. Most contact us through our online portal that's downloadable and accessible, that kids either put on their phone or their Chromebook. But we do get phone calls and other tips from parents. And so people can call 1-800-MY-SUSO1 if they don't have the app or they don't know how to access it. But by going to Speak Out Wisconsin on our website, they can fill out a form and make a report. We ask everyone that makes a tip if they'd like to be confidential. We respect that as much as possible in terms of people need to feel comfortable coming forward. And we encourage families, especially for the younger children, or maybe children who are struggling with telling someone about the worry, but they've told their mom or dad, and then mom or dad feel worried, they don't know what to do about it. Please let us know. Please contact SUSO about any concerns about school-aged youth, so we can get the school and potentially law enforcement. And I say that if there's a life safety matter, if somebody is, posting that they're going to kill themselves, if somebody is, making posts about bringing a gun to school, those are situations that we have to respond to very, very effectively. And that does include law enforcement. One of the beautiful things about SUSO is that since it's a 24/7 call center, we might get a concern, let's say, that a parent provides for us, that a student has posted that they're going to bring a gun to school, or they're planning to an act of violence. We're able to intervene on that before school even opens. And so that this is a real preventative opportunity to make sure that kids aren't further psychologically traumatized by the actions that have to happen in order to keep our schools safe. And we also have to balance and have a response that's commensurate with the risk. And we help schools figure that out, about how if they receive a threat, how likely it is, what is the value of their threat, how likely is it going to occur, and what are the options to move forward. So we have broad ways, comprehensive ways that we support parents, communities, students, law enforcement, and mental health providers in Wisconsin when it comes to school safety.
Again, thank you, Trish, for the work you do with SUSO and for sharing with us all the different ways that it can support safety for our kids at school. I want to shift a little bit now. OCMH prioritizes talking about the role everyone can play in youth mental health crisis. And as we do that, we're especially focused on youth voice. Heidi, I think you have an experience to share with our audience that's along these lines in terms of youth voice. I'd like to turn it over to you.
I'm sorry, you cut out for a moment. Did you ask me to say something?
Yeah, I thought that you had a personal classroom experience that around youth voice that would be really interesting for our audience to hear.
Yeah, one of the things, so, I mentioned that I spent 14 years as a middle school teacher, and I really, really appreciated what Trish was saying earlier about how drills should be structured, because one of the things that really stood out to me about a lockdown drill as opposed to a fire drill or a tornado drill, I'm not going to try and speculate why, because I'm not a therapist or a psychologist, but students react very differently to them, even when they are structured in the same ways. For a fire drill, we would evacuate the building, wait till they gave us the okay to come back in, and just move on with our day. When we had a lockdown drill, students really, really wanted to talk about it afterwards. They were not ready to move on once we got sent back to our seats. And that was kind of heartbreaking for me to see that, there are definitely students who process a lockdown drill as a notification that they may not be safe in schools. And of course, there's a huge variety of responses that different children have, but it was always sad for me to see that students were scared after lockdown drills. So everything that Trish was saying about how to structure those drills, I think is incredibly important, just from my own personal experience also.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I mean, it is something that we hear regularly from educators, from families, from therapists working with kids, that we really have to give space for the different reactions that kids have and really address those reactions so that they don't carry this traumatizing event forward with them. So while we focus on youth mental health, we really cannot ignore that educators who are responsible for the safety of their students should a school shooting occur. How do we prepare both the adults and kids in the school without frightening them and without overwhelming them? Larice, do you have some comments on that?
Sure. I think really seeing all players in a school setting as equal partners. I think sometimes as educators, we feel like we have the responsibility solely, and we all, as just mentioned, absolutely play a role. Some of the work that we've been doing at the Center for All is really centered in youth voice and youth advocacy. And so really preparing our youth to be able to be leaders in this space around increased sense of belonging. We talked a lot about reporting earlier, and really having ownership in the school community. And so we actually just last week or 2 weeks ago, just met with several high school groups in a summer workshop in partnership with We Are United, We Are Many United Against Hate, and skilling up students and staff, advisors, faculty to be able to work together in partnership to I would say maybe lessen the burden of feeling like it's only the adults in the school environment and the educational environment. And so youth play a really big role. Also, a lot of the work that we do at the Center for All is also in partnership with communities. And so we, of course, talked about the role parents play, our community partners, our nonprofit partners, our business partners, and really being able to have the discussion that we're having today in our own communities, because we all have resources that, as we mentioned before, that fear, the having a fear or having anxiety, parents sending their children to school with the expectation that our schools are going to keep our students safe, their children safe. They have of course, a vested interest as well, and have ideas that we can partner with. And so, really, as we think about a strategy or an approach to take, is how do you have a conversation with all of those in your school community and the larger school community to be able to utilize and leverage the resources that you have available so that our adults in the building don't feel like it's only their burden. That would be the comments I would say about that.
Thank you. Trish, have some comments about cross-disciplinary team approaches to supporting the educators through mental health professionals and other post-intervention work, work with schools and educators.
Yeah, so a couple things come to mind, Linda. We do really stress that we're best and we're strongest when we have a multidisciplinary approach. And so we need to give voice and give opportunities to hear from our students, our staff, our other partners across the school community, and our law enforcement partners as well, so that we develop more effective strategies. I will say that when a crisis does impact a school, it is a very challenging time for that school. And we at the Office of School Safety do provide crisis response and support services to promote recovery, and that is free to every school. We have developed 12 teams corresponding to every CISA region. We have toolkits in every CISA region. And so to access support, if you have a crisis event, whether that's a traumatic event related to feeling unsafe at school, or something happens that's sudden and unexpected, like a death or an accident, we are here to help, because in order to be safe at school, kids have to feel safe at school. And after a crisis event, it's important for us to prioritize reaffirming a sense of safety and a sense that we care about how they might be feeling as they're processing these events. And I really love what Loree said earlier about the importance of psychological first aid. We don't have to be therapists to be therapeutic with our kids, but we need to empower school staff, caregivers, parents, in what it looks like when a child's processing trauma, in how they might manifest that, how that might appear, and then how can we respond in effective ways, and what's not so effective for kids. And everyone wants our kids to recover when they're exposed to violent events or other traumas, and we can provide some input so that people can have a toolkit available to them to know how to support youth most effectively, because our goal is to get them back to learning. And if we don't provide this type of services, they're going to struggle longer, and it's going to delay access to their learning.
Yeah, supports for the students and the educators are just so important, and be thinking about that all along the way here. So what's clear from this discussion today is that just as we have had to have several people on this panel, ensuring school safety really requires a multi-pronged effort. We need families, gun owners, family doctors, local law enforcement, neighbors, community members, school staff, and students themselves, all working together to achieve school safety for kids, for both psychological and physical. So, and as we wrap up today's webinar, I do want to thank the panel for their work every day and the insights they shared with us today. We really appreciate that. And I want to remind everyone that we'll be sharing a list of resources with those of you who registered for this event. And then finally, I just want to thank all of you who have attended today for joining in on this discussion, learning with us about the ways to address school safety and children's mental health. It's a very important topic, and we are pleased that so many people are interested in learning and engaging with us about this. Thanks again for your participation, and thanks again to the panel.